Well, this has not been happened. Although U.S. President Joe Biden had said before the presidency that he would like to return to the nuclear deal with Iran. Where's the problem that this has not been happened yet?
I think that the problem is that he's just settling into the presidency. He's got to deal with all kinds of problems left over from the last president. He's also got problems to deal with in terms of other players in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, for instance. And so he wants to be very, very careful and move forward on the Iranian issue step by step. But I think that he means what he says. And don't forget, in his cabinet, there is a figure like John Kerry, who is involved, of course, in negotiating the nuclear agreement with Iran. And he'll be telling the president that he's very sympathetic to negotiations to resume this kind of agreement. So it will come, but there are going to be some problems, and they will be difficult negotiations, because so much has happened during the 4 years of the Donald Trump administration. Many things need to be put right.
So the U.S. government appears to be seeking a more comprehensive agreement, especially on regional issues such as Yemen. What do you think about that?
Well, they've got to move on Yemen. And for them, as I say, Saudi Arabia is a bit of a problem. They've released the intelligence report that implicates the Crown Prince in the assassination of Khashoggi. The Crown Prince has also been involved in waging the war in Yemen. He was also directly involved in the blockade of Qatar. He made many, many foreign policy blunders. So the United States wants to roll back these blunders one by one. But as I say, a great deal of mess has developed in the 4 years since all of this happened underneath the Donald Trump regime. So it really is going to take a bit of time. So I'm urging patience for everybody concerned. Some things are being solved, like the Qatar issue has been solved. The blockade has been ended, for instance. The Yemen issue next, then I think the Iranian nuclear agreement issue.
So you think the policy of United States again about Saudi Arabia would is going to be changed, right?
It's going to be problematic because what they want to do is to not make Prince bin Salman stand down, but they want to make sure he doesn't misbehave again in the future. They want to put a fence around him. So they have to be very, very careful in doing this, but that's what they want to do. They don't depend on Saudi Arabia for oil anymore. The United States is almost self-sufficient now in energy resources, but they still regard Saudi Arabia as a very key strategic ally in geopolitical terms in the region, and they want to maintain that kind of relationship. At the same time, they're very, very conscious that significant elements in Saudi Arabia are still involved in financing anti-Western terrorism. So they want to be able to unpick this without causing alarm. And of course, you've got additional elements in the Middle East like Israel and the Palestine issue. That's going to take a long time to sort out. But I think they'll be looking at that after the Iran issue. In other words, dealing with the Iran nuclear issue will be easier for the Americans than dealing with the Israel-Palestine issue.
Mr. Chan, some countries such as Japan, Saudi Arabia, or Israel, they say that they want to be part of the new nuclear deal with Iran. What do you think about that? I mean, the next JCPOA version 2.
I think that you should have many nations involved in a new deal. In other words, make it into a proper multilateral event, not just the Western powers, but countries like Japan, for instance, bring, as it were, a new dimension, a new perspective to all of this. Of course, the Japanese have their own, as it were, agenda, because a deal of this sort they could use in their dealings with China, which is, of course, a very large nuclear power. So everybody's interested in the issue of a nuclear agreement to try to reduce tensions in their regions. And in this sense, one region can learn from another. In other words, what could happen is that Iran could become an example to other regions as to how to do this. You've got very skillful negotiators. We all admire your negotiators. So there's a chance to do something not just for US-Iran relationships, but to do something which is an example to the wider world.
So, by the way, it looks like we have to waiting for a JCPOA version 2, right?
You have to wait for that in terms of the public sphere of action. Behind the scenes, there will be many, many diplomatic, as it were, initiatives taking place without any publicity at all. All kinds of diplomatic contacts using third parties, particularly people from Europe, for instance, academic contacts, that kind of thing. So the trick is to continue to be engaged in these not yet public contacts to try to set the ground for when the public contacts begin. And I think it's also a time when the exchange of goodwill gestures is probably good, sending signals one side to the other side, small things that don't endanger your security, obviously, but sending goodwill gestures of one sort or another to show that your heart is dedicated to eventually successful negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And so, what do you think about this after we game going to be end between Iran and United States?
I think that if you're looking at a timeline, you're probably looking at some kind of a solid agreement in the second year of the President Biden administration. It's not going to come immediately, but what you could have in the exchanging of goodwill gestures is at some stage in the first year of the Biden administration, a decrease in the sanctions. That won't come immediately, but it all depends on the exchange of goodwill gestures. So for the Americans, reducing the sanctions will be a goodwill gesture, but that would follow upon goodwill gestures from Iran as well. Now, obviously, there's the big problem of pride, who, as it were, makes the first gesture. But that's where the private discussions using the Europeans, no one needs to know about these. These are all done in private. But, you time it exactly so they happen within a day of each other. And these things can be arranged so that no side feels humiliated as having to move too quickly and get no response. It's all set up ahead of time. This is the proper work of professional diplomats.
So recently, I think just yesterday, one of the officials in the United States said that we are in diplomatic way with Iran in a second by the third party or third countries. What do you think about that?
This is something which is common in diplomacy. So the Americans would probably want to have a European power, maybe a country like France involved, or they mightn't even use an official power. They might use people who are not affiliated to any government. Sometimes senior academics, for instance, have been involved in carrying the messages backwards and forwards. But they're very, very well connected. In other words, when you make a phone call, someone answers it at the other end in the White House. It's that kind of third-party involvement, either using official people from a friendly government, like France, or using unattached academics who don't serve anybody, but who can be relied upon to understand the situation, carrying the messages backwards and forwards. That's very common in international relations. It's called track 2 diplomacy, but when it's done so closely to track 1 or official diplomacy, I call it track 1.5 diplomacy myself.
Okay, that's good. And for the last question, how likely is to reach a new and more up-to-date agreement than the 2015 agreement?
I think the new agreement, when it finally comes, is, as I say, it's not going to happen immediately. There'll be a lot of patient discussion and negotiation leading up to that point in time. I think the new agreement is probably going to be a more secure one. It's going to bring greater peace. And the most important thing, it will bring Iran out of the cold. It will bring it into proper international relations as an equal to all other states. Now, this is important for Iran because what it does, it basically makes you in American foreign policy equal to Saudi Arabia. In other words, a lot of the difficulties of the region could be solved, not just the nuclear issue, but greater security in terms of a proper balance of power, a proper diplomatic recognition in the region, but also greater respect in the wider world. So there are many, many things to play for, but both sides have got to play it skillfully, and they've got to play it, of course, very, very patiently. So much damage was done in the Donald Trump years. It's not going to happen overnight, for instance. But I think that skillful people on both sides, and I've seen your foreign minister in action, Mr. Javad Zarif. He's first class. I mean, he's so good as a foreign minister. You couldn't hope for anybody better. Just give him some kind of headroom to move. He's American educated. He has an American PhD. He understands these people. At the same time, he's obviously a son of Iran, and he understands the French. He understands, the Western world. But at the same time, he is a very, very able diplomat and a patriotic person. So what you've got to do is to empower such influential and professionally accomplished people. Well, I listened to him speak at the Doha Forum at the end of 2019, before the pandemic made these things impossible. But when I was listening to him at the Doha Forum, he was just so professional. His speech was so good, in such perfect English. He made the American Treasury Secretary, who was also at the Doha Forum, seem uneducated by comparison. So this kind of sophisticated person who brings a sophisticated approach to negotiations, that will serve Iran very, very well.
Mr. John, anything else?
Well, look, I wish you guys all good luck. Just one thing, and that is one of the turning points when John Kerry was negotiating with you, was that he suddenly decided one day that, look, these people have got a very, very long, proud history. In ancient times, you were the great civilization in the entire world. And basically, you accomplished so much for the development of civilization. And so John Kerry just basically decided, I've got to treat these people with respect, not as outlaws, but with respect. So this kind of respect, going backwards and forwards, is key to diplomatic communication. Now, I think that the new American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, will try to continue this sense of respect, which means cultural diplomacy becomes very, very important as a first step to educate people that you're dealing with very sophisticated societies. You're dealing with very sophisticated states. It's not just a bunch of religious people. You know how they have this cartoon image, but you're dealing with proud civilization. You're dealing with a very, very well-developed nation.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chan.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you.